Hello and welcome to our Living with the Inner Critic workshop. So I was originally going to call this Silence in the Inner Critic, but actually, in fact, on reflection, I thought Living with the Inner Critic was much more apt. We all have that inner critic voice, including me, but we can learn to reduce its influence and also soften it a little bit to allow us to live with it and not allow it to control our lives rather than completely getting rid of it. It's not possible to completely get rid of it, as I have really come to realize while trying to develop this video. No matter how hard we try, it will always be there, and I will explain why it will always be there. But as I said, we can reduce its influence and we can soften it a little bit, and we can turn it into a more positive cheerleader-like voice rather than that inner harsh critic. So in this video, we are going to cover lots of practical tips to allow us to coexist with that inner voice and also maybe transform that voice so that, as I said, we are living with something that supports us rather than hinders us. I heard something on a podcast recently that really hit home, and it is that we cannot hate ourselves into change. So we often think that it is better to force ourselves into change and to think of ourselves or talk to ourselves in a negative way, and that negative voice and that hard energy will keep us going and keep the momentum. But in fact, the reality is that we need self-compassion when we're trying to change. We cannot give ourselves a hard time when we are trying to change. And that really hit deep with me, and it's really powerful, and I'm going to bring that idea into this workshop. So here are some really practical tips that we can use to begin to coexist and live with that inner critic. So, like everything with me, the first step is awareness. So just becoming aware of that inner critic voice and what it is saying to you. So I like to do this through the power of journaling, and you can do it that way if you wish, but really it's just becoming aware. When we journal or when we become aware of that inner critical voice, we begin to notice reoccurring thought patterns. We begin to notice that self-judgment is coming up time and time again, and it has a similar tone, a similar voice, a similar message. It's just becoming aware of that without judgment, without criticism. And just becoming aware is super powerful. When we do recognize it, it is to recognize it with curiosity. So I mentioned at the beginning that our inner critic will not go away, and the reason it will not go away is because humans have an internal inbuilt psyche that protects us from danger. So often our inner critic comes in when we are fearful of change, when we are in danger or perceived danger in some way. So we're out of our comfort zone, things are not feeling good, etc. And it's just to acknowledge that. So it's asking yourself, when that inner critic comes up, is it trying to give me a message? Is it trying to tell me something? And that just immediately softens it. So maybe you're switching from that inner critic voice to that curiosity of, oh, maybe it's trying to tell me something. What is it trying to tell me? And maybe you can move from that. But just even that awareness that it's trying to tell you something is super powerful. You know that acquaintance that we have, that they always have this negative thing to say. We all have those in our life, and they always have something to say that's negative. How do you deal with that person? So dealing with that person, often at the beginning you're frustrated, you're annoyed, you cannot believe what they've said, you cannot believe that they're criticizing you or they're criticizing somebody else. But over time, you begin to not listen to them as much. And that's how we respond to our inner critic. When we're aware this person is negative or this inner voice is negative, it becomes less influential over time, because you know that it's just complaining, it's just here to complain, and it's not really going to make a big difference to you if you don't absorb it. So it's really understanding, being curious, but also knowing that this is just a moany voice, or this is just something that's probably not going to serve me. Over time, influence will drop and you will become back in the driving seat. And those small shifts help to create distance between that inner critical voice and your peace. I love to name inner voices. So I have inner voices that tell me different things, and I name them. So for example, when you have a negative voice. Let's say you have something that's constantly coming up that's really negative and you're aware now and it's always there in the background. Maybe we call it something like negative Nancy or whatever you want to call it. It's really funny when you start to name it. What it does is it creates it as a separate entity to you. So then you can name it and say, oh, there's negative Nancy again, or there's whatever you're naming your own inner voice. And then it creates that separation, creates that distance that I'm speaking about. And you can almost look at it as a third party then and see, is it logical what it's saying? Is it factual, or is it just bull? And if it is factual, we deal with that. But if it's not, we just let it pass by. And again, it's reducing that influence and creating that distance. You can see where I'm going with this. Also, maybe, just maybe, but often, our negative voice is somebody from our past. Or maybe it's somebody that's in your current life, but they have said something to you in the past. So a huge amount of our negative self-talk, our trauma that we have and we've carried into adult life is from childhood. So there may be something or someone that has said something to you in the past that has resonated deeply with you, and you may not be aware of it. But often our inner voice captures the voice of that person, so that may be one way of identifying it. And maybe through deep awareness and exploration of your inner voice, you might begin to notice, actually, that thought wasn't mine. That was that one person, that girl that said something to me in the playground, and it has resonated with me. And I never believed that about myself until I heard that. So it's again creating that distance and that awareness so that we can change. So noticing, is that inner voice somebody else's voice, or is it truly yours? Another really powerful tip is to use neutral language. So what I mean by neutral language is to, instead of saying I am lazy, say I feel lazy today. That then creates a shift from I am, like it's almost ingrained in you and it's a part of who you are, to I feel it. It's an emotion. I feel it, or maybe you are tired and it's a physical problem that you have that day, but it's separating the I am and you taking that on as your identity, separating that as a separate entity again. Another nice thing to say is, say instead of saying I am lazy, I feel tired today, and as a result I will rest. So taking away the I am and adding an and really allows that action piece to come in. So instead of saying I am lazy, you are saying I feel tired, and as a result I am going to rest. That really, really shifts the mindset. So it really shifts the mindset from you being a lazy person to feeling tired and doing something about it. Powerful, powerful work. I mentioned this already, but just noticing, does the inner voice have any protective information within it? So I talked about our natural ability to protect ourselves from scary or fearful or bad situations. So just noticing, is that inner critic trying to protect you from any of that? And if it is trying to protect you from that, that awareness brings a new light to the situation. Because maybe you can say, actually, it's not, I don't need to be fearful, I'm not in danger here, and you can move through that. So I love looking at that stuck mindset versus that growth mindset, and I want to give you some examples here today, but using that type of mindset in your awareness and your conversation with the inner critic is really powerful. So instead of having a stuck mindset, try to use a setback. Maybe you've had a setback in your life, using that setback as a growth opportunity. Here are a couple of examples of a stuck mindset versus a growth mindset. Excuse me, I will just read, but I just want to give you some ideas. So instead of saying, I'm just not good at this, if you are trying to learn something new, there's no point in me trying, say, this is hard. So acknowledging it is hard, but with practice, I'll get better. So that is amazing for when you're trying to learn something new. If you're dealing with failure, instead of saying, I failed, so I must not be good enough, say, what can I learn from this and how can I improve? There are loads of examples for you within the app. The inner critic will be judgmental when you are maybe failed or maybe things didn't go the way you wanted them to. But if you use this stuck versus growth mindset, it's really powerful to allow you to shift to a growth mindset and use that inner critic as a way to develop and expand and become a better version of you. My favorite thing to do when beginning to deal with the inner critic is firstly become aware, secondly gratitude. So gratitude for me is the most powerful way to shift from a negative mindset to a positive. So beginning to practice gratitude daily, reminding yourself to practice gratitude daily, whatever way you can. Maybe it's in your journal, maybe it's part of your journal practice, maybe it is a reminder on your phone to practice gratitude. But what that does is that mindset of gratitude allows you to begin to counteract that negative voice. And over time, I promise you, the bigger, nicer, more grateful thoughts and patterns will take over from the inner critic. That was my biggest shift with my inner critic, was beginning to practice gratitude daily. So maybe writing down one thing that you are grateful for every day, and it's very, very powerful. When you are struggling with being negative, you might come back to that area of gratitude within your journal, or maybe you have a note in your phone and you can look at what you should be grateful for or what you have to be grateful for, and the inner critic then begins to be counteracted. A similar idea is talking about small wins and recording small wins. When we record small wins, we tap in to that growth and abundant mindset instead of that lack mindset, that mindset that gets in on our psyche, that gets in on our self-worth. We don't like that. We do not want that, and we want to reduce it as much as possible. But if we look at our small wins, the tiniest of wins, every single day or every single week, we will tune into that abundant mindset. Look at all the things we have done in our life, and when we write them down on a daily, you really see your value. You really see how powerful you are. I want to draw your attention to the self-compassion playlist within the app. And why I want to bring your attention to that is because self-compassion is definitely the way forward when dealing with change. So instead of being critical and using that inner critic voice, we tap into self-compassion to counteract that negative voice. And that is how we change. That is how we grow. That is how we start to silence or coexist with the inner critic. So as you can see, the inner critic is not going anywhere, but we can learn to coexist. We can learn to soften, and we can learn to, when the awareness comes in and when the inner critic comes in, we can learn to lean into self-compassion and different mindsets to allow us to reduce the influence of our inner critic. I hope you found this helpful. As I said, please just go slow with this. Take it step by step. I've given you absolutely loads of tips and loads of practical advice within this video, but please take it slowly. Maybe you take one thing at a time. Do whatever suits you. I really hope this helps. Do let me know how you get on, and I will chat to you very soon. Take care.